Hello everyone, US history. Hope you're doing great today. We are ready to cover a new set of standards, US-16 to US-18. We are still in the progressive era. This is actually the last lesson of the progressive era. And today we're going to talk about two presidents, and then we're going to talk about women's suffrage, which is fantastic. Remember, suffrage sounds like a bad word, but it's actually a good word. It means the right to vote. And women's suffrage, women's right to vote, was a fantastic thing in America that happened. So yay, success! Also, if you ever hear someone say end women's suffrage, which sounds like a good thing because the word suffrage sounds like a bad thing, but if they're saying end women's suffrage, that's not good. You need to have some words with them, okay? Women's right to vote, women's suffrage, that's US-18. But first, we are going to start with one of the most interesting presidents that we've had in history, who is President Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is a very, very good president for the American people because he does a lot of things that help out the American people, okay? So there are the few things that we're going to talk about, and one of them we've already kind of mentioned. First one is the square deal, which we haven't learned about yet, but we're going to get to today. Trust busting. We talked about this one in the last lesson, which is where Roosevelt went after the trusts, and he did 40 different lawsuits that went after trusts because he thought the trusts were taking advantage of the American people. Remember, trusts and monopolies, they charge customers really high prices and they made their workers work a whole lot, which is tough. So Roosevelt is really going to be looking after the American people here. Also, a way that he's really, really going to be looking after the American people and still helps us out today, he gets past the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. If you remember that section from the jungle that I read to you last time about the meat that had the rat dung on it, which is poop, gross, and stuff like that, Roosevelt, he found out about all this and he's like, yo, gross, we got to get this fixed up. So he gets some legislation passed that helps out, keeps our food safe, and it still does that to this day, and keeps our medicine safe, which is good. You don't want to take bad medicine, it could kill you. And last thing, conservation, and what we're talking about here is land. And I don't know about you guys, but I love going to parks, like going outside, like national parks. I love Barfield Park, as you know. So this is a big deal. Roosevelt, overall, he's a good guy for the American people, okay? Let me just take a look and make sure this looks okay. The last video was a little crooked. Perfect. Looks great. So yeah. So Roosevelt, and I think the best way to do this is to jump right in. Remember to email me. Guys, y'all been doing a fantastic job on all the work. Please keep it up. You're doing a great job. We're almost to fall break. Yay! But we're doing a great job. Remember, you can pause as needed and take breaks and email me with any questions. Remember to visit my webpage and you can download all these PowerPoints and the notes. And I think it's time to rock and roll. Very good. Cool. Hope you all are having a good day. All right, so here we go. Roosevelt. He is what we call a progressive president. Remember, our base word here is progress. So we're moving forward, not backward. Things are getting better in America. He is forward thinking, and not only that, he has a no-nonsense approach to the presidency. He's not going to get up there and he's not going to act like a fancy politician and try to do all these fancy things. He's going to say, hey, look, here are the problems I see in America. He is an activist, meaning he's going to actively help people out, and he's going to say, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and he gets the job done. So Roosevelt, for Americans at home, is a very good president. Later, we're going to talk about how Roosevelt and his imperialist policies are a little bit sketchy, and he kind of does some bad things elsewhere in the world. But for what you need to know right now, at home, Roosevelt is a good guy for the American people. He takes care of his people, okay? So he's moving forward. He is a progressive president, okay? Rock and roll. All right, so a couple of things. This is Roosevelt, and it says, protect and pressure the remaining forests upon public lands, preserve the public lands, excuse me. So he's pro-nature, pro-national parks. We're going to talk about that later. And this is just kind of a poster. It says Progressive Party, pass prosperity around. So it's a little bit like a campaigning type deal. But let's just keep rocking and rolling and see what he actually does. All right, the first thing, and this is really, really good here. Roosevelt passes something called a square deal. Now, it doesn't mean square as in like that kind of square. It means a square deal as in it's fair. A square is all equal on all four sides, right? It's equal for everybody. So if it's a square deal, it's a deal that's equal for everybody and it's going to help out all people. There are three ways you can break this down. It's called the 3 C's. First one, control of corporations. That goes back to that trust busting. So he's going to be antitrust. He's not fully antitrust, but anti-bad trust. Remember, he goes after the bad trust and he restrains the good trust. So this helps out the American people because it keeps prices low and it gives workers rights. So labor unions, he helps out labor unions, that sort of thing. So control of corporations, that's the first C. Okay, so there's 3 C's. Control of corporations, that's the first one. Second one, consumer protection. Consumer protection, okay? So this is going to be your Meat Inspection Act, okay? I'm going to try to write a little bit more and kind of get your notes going before we get started. So that way, if you are taking notes, I know a lot of you are taking notes at home from what I'm hearing, that's great. So I'm going to give you some hints and stuff along the way. So consumer protection. Protection means, like if you read that part of the jungle that I read to you in the last one, where it's talking about they have rat poop on the meat and they put chemicals on the meat and all that stuff. He's going to really crack down on this and say, hey, y'all can't do that. That's really bad for the people. People were eating this stuff and getting really sick and sometimes even dying. So Roosevelt, he's going to be looking out for the people. He's going to be looking out for consumers. And consumers are you and me, okay? That's us. We are the consumers. So he does the Meat Inspection Act, which means these people, this government institution goes in and takes a look at these meat factories and says, hey, you got to do this, you can't do that, you got to follow these rules, etc. And the second thing he does under this is the Food and Drug Act. Food and Drug Act. And all that means is that when you buy food at the grocery store, if it's in a package, or if you buy medicine, not drugs, but medicine, if you buy food or medicine, it has to have the ingredients listed on the outside. That's what this does that you need to know about, okay? So this really protects you because now you know exactly what you're getting rather than before. Remember that excerpt was talking about they put chemicals on the meat and it had rat poop on it. Ugh, gross. So this is much better. This is good for consumers, good for you and me. So that's Roosevelt's second thing with the 3 C's. The third thing is conservation. And what we're talking about here is land, and specifically the national parks. The national park system actually gets established under Wilson, but Roosevelt really sets it up because he sets aside land and he says, hey, let's keep this nature perfect. Let's keep it pristine. Let's keep it how it is. Now, I know you might be sitting at home and be saying, well, the Native Americans did the same thing. Yes. You are correct. I'm not disagreeing with you. The way the government before Roosevelt treated the Native Americans was horrible, and it should have remained their land. But unfortunately, it didn't. I know, it's pretty crappy. But with Roosevelt, he sees land that's pristine, like places like Yosemite, Yellowstone, and Grand Canyon, and places like that. And he says, hey, these places are pretty fantastic. They're pretty amazing. They're pretty beautiful. So let's set them aside, let's conserve them, and we're going to leave them alone so that way future Americans can enjoy them, okay? So that's the square deal. Remember, a square is fair because it's equal to everybody, so you can almost call it a fair deal, square deal, okay? And it's got the 3 C's, and that's control of corporations, so he goes after the trust. Remember, he's a trust buster. It's got consumer protection, which keeps you eating safe. All right, hey, sorry, y'all got a phone call in the middle of that one. Anyways, so I believe I was right here talking about consumer protection. So Roosevelt also helps out consumers, just reviewing again. He helps out with the Meat Inspection Act, where he goes into those meat factories and he says, hey, you can't do this. He sends in government people and they say, hey, you can't do this. And then the Food and Drug Act, and that's where they list the ingredients on the outside of your food, your prepackaged food, and your medicine. And lastly, of course, he does set aside land that will become the future national parks and everything, okay? So there's Roosevelt's square deal. Let me take a look at this, just make sure it's looking good. Make sure we're not crooked. Oh, yes, it looks beautiful. Beautiful. All right, so you see, here's Roosevelt's image, his profile here, and it's got the square deal underneath, and you see the people's confidence in Roosevelt is going way, way up, okay? So people in America, Americans at home, really, really like Roosevelt. Good guy president for Americans at home. He is a progressive, meaning things are moving forward in America, and that's usually pretty much a good thing, okay? All right, so again, and we just went over these, control of corporations, of course, Roosevelt, he's a trust buster who goes after these overly powerful monopolies. He doesn't hate monopolies, he just wants monopolies to better serve the people. He wants workers to have rights, and he wants consumers like you and me to be able to afford the goods that we need. Secondly, of course, he oversaw the Pure Food and Drug Act and made sure that that the ingredients are listed on the outside of your food and your medicines. And of course, the Meat Inspection Act, which hopefully got the meat factories to be a little less gross. It's pretty unbelievable that stuff that was in the jungle, right? And then the last thing, the conservation, Roosevelt sets aside public lands that will eventually become the National Park Service, okay? So I think we went over that already. If you need to pause this and read this, it's got it all pretty laid out here, but if you watched the last 5 minutes of the video, you got a pretty good idea of Roosevelt's square deal. Remember, pause if you need to, take a break if you need to, but let's rock and roll, keep on going. So again, it just breaks it down. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but Roosevelt's square deal broken down just like this. And remember, Roosevelt is a progressive president, making progress. So he's very, very good for the American people. He looks out for the nation's welfare, which is our well-being, okay? All right, cool. Rocking and rolling. So we got a few good political cartoons here, and I like these. Let me make sure they're looking good on the screen, and I'm going to zoom in on a few of them. So you can see Roosevelt, he's always depicted as kind of this like manly man where he's got big muscles and stuff. And Roosevelt as a person, he's kind of this type of way. He was, of course, he was in the military. He was with the Rough Riders in Puerto Rico. We're going to talk about that later. But he's just kind of this manly man. And so there's all these cartoons that depict him as such. Here he is, and he's defending the public welfare. And it says, right makes might. Roosevelt has this philosophy of speak softly and carry a big stick. We're going to talk about that more later when we talk about Roosevelt's imperialist policies, where he goes and kind of expands America's influence around the world. But he's kind of depicted as this guy who looks out for Americans through being strong. So, for example, here he is depicted as being very strong, and he's wrestling against something that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year. This is the railroad, and what this symbolizes is monopolies, okay? So the monopolistic practices of the railroad, where they're overcharging farmers and things like that. Roosevelt, he's going to be a man that looks out for the people, and he's going to go after things like this. And of course, you see Uncle Sam, which symbolizes USA, watching. Down here, if you notice, he's got, it says meat scandal. You can see a skull here. And this is Roosevelt, of course, and you see the government building in the background. And he is raking in the meat scandal. Now, this is an allusion to the muckrakers, who we talked about in the last lesson. The muckrakers who kind of rake in the muck. They expose the scandal. They expose the nastiness that was in America. And it's going to lead to change. It's going to lead to these progressive idealists, such as Roosevelt, making changes, getting new ideas, and making good changes for Americans. So this is really, really, really good, okay? And then once more, the one we've already seen, Roosevelt has killed the bad trusts, and he has the good trusts on a leash of restraint, okay? And there he is standing, and then these guys are just running away. They symbolize the other trusts. All right? If you have any questions on those, let me know, and send me an email, and we'll clear it all up. So again, Roosevelt, he is not completely anti-trust. He believes that trusts, they're okay to exist. They're not all bad. However, what he wants is that trusts should serve the public good. Remember, Roosevelt, man of the people. He wants to help out American people. So he's going to make sure that these trusts are helping out the American people. And he's going to help out the workers too. Now, under his presidency, he's going to file 44 different antitrust lawsuits, okay? And so that way, he wants to make sure the bad trusts are staying in line. So people like Standard Oil and all these other big ones that are doing way too much, charging their customers way too much, making their workers work way too much and not giving them any rights. That's who he's going after, is these companies that mistreat people, okay? Because remember, Roosevelt, and I know I've said it a bunch of times, I'm going to say it one more time, Roosevelt is a man for the American people. And that way, he's a progressive, okay? So again, we've seen this one. Trustbuster breaks up the monopolies. This goes back to Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick, his policy. And again, we'll talk about more about that later. I really like this one because, like I was mentioning a minute ago, Roosevelt's always depicted as kind of this like manly man. And all the lions, they say beef trust, oil trust, steel trust, sugar trust, railroad trust. And here he is the lion tamer. So he is the tamer of the trusts, all right? So hopefully these cartoons are making sense. We do look at a lot of these cartoons in this class because a lot of them are on our EOC test. And I know y'all hate the tests, but it's the game we got to play, and we're going to try to play to win. And the best way to do it is to look at a lot of these and practice. Very good. Let me know if you got any questions about any of these. Some cool cartoons. Let's keep rocking and rolling. All right, now, the Pure Food and Drug Act. So we're going to go more specific into this and talk about what it actually does. So what it does, it bans the sale of improperly labeled foods. It sets purity standards, meaning you can't put poison in the food. If you recall that excerpt from The Jungle where it was talking about they brought the old sausage over from Europe, and by that time they got here, it had molded and it was all gross and nasty. And so they said, hey, stop putting poison on food. That's really bad for people. You can't do that, okay? So it sets a standard, and it says not only that, but you have to put all the ingredients on the outside of the packaging. People need to know what they're eating. Duh. I mean, it seems like common sense to us, but, you know, common sense comes through experience, okay? So this helps out with the food and safety industry, or the safety of the food industry, helps people out, makes it safer for you and me, and thank goodness this happened, because hopefully we're not eating that gross of food anymore. Time for class. All right, now, the Food and Drug Administration, they come later, but they are based on this stuff, that we need to keep the food safe. And so we have an actual whole government agency called the FDA now that keeps this in line. So they're the ones that go into the factories now and they check on things, okay? So Pure Food and Drug Act, it's really straightforward actually, pure food and pure drugs. This puts labels on your stuff that you buy at the store. All right, so I want to show you just, first of all, it's kind of funny. Well, kind of not funny, I guess, if you think about it. So back in the day, drugs and food were a little bit different. If you notice, it says cocaine toothache drops. Now, I don't know how potent these were, but I don't think this would be legal nowadays. But anyway, so this is the kind of sort of thing that Roosevelt's going to go after. He's going to say, hey, maybe not so good, you know? And so we get a new drug law. And notice, I really like this one, the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. And you get this guy, he's fighting off death, and it's thanks to this, the Pure Food and Drug Act. And again, one more time, Roosevelt, the muckraker, the progressive idealist, he's got good ideas. He's fixing up the meat industry, and it says meat scandal. The scandal was what we read, the terrible stuff that was happening to the meat before it was sold to the customers. Yikes. So Roosevelt, thank you, sir, for getting our food just a little bit safer. Thank you. Very good. And that takes us to the next part, the Meat Inspection Act, which of course was inspired after the book The Jungle came out. And I read you that section from The Jungle, and I know I keep mentioning that. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, go back and watch the other video where I talk about it. It talks about there's piles of meat in a room, and the roof is leaking water on the meat, and there's rats running all over the meat, and they're pooping on the meat, and the men are walking around spitting, and they're dropping pieces of meat, and they're just picking it back up and throwing it into what they call the hopper, which is just like a meat bucket that chops it all up and puts it all back together. And then it goes into a can. Then it goes to the grocery store and gets sold to you and me. Thankfully, not so much anymore. Thank goodness, at least as far as we know. Ooh, scary. All right, so the Meat Inspection Act, the government passes this, so that puts like the FDA, which comes later, they're the guys who go in and make sure that things are okay with our meat and our food. And this goes also to the US Department of Agriculture, who they also keep an eye and make sure your meat is sanitary, okay? This was very dangerous. Before this, people actually did die from food poisoning and things like that, which is just a really terrible way to die. I don't know if you've ever had food poisoning, but it makes you feel like you're going to die. And if it's on that level, woo, it's not good. Not good, not good, not good. All right, so some more cartoons, per usual. I love these two. This guy, he's opened up his potted chicken. In Chicago, it was home to the meat industry, like the main meat industry was there. And this like live chicken pops out and he said, was anyone asking for me? That's so funny to me. Here you got a guy, he symbolizes the beef trust. It says deodorized ham, putrefied pork, tuberculosis lamb, chemical corned beef, potted poison, decayed roast beef, gross, disgusting, decayed roast beef, yeah, nasty. And then you got this guy, he's like, ah, and then this little live thing, I don't even know what that is, looks like a rat jumping out of there, and he's like, ah. But what the result is, thanks to Roosevelt, is now we get this. Meaning somebody has checked out this meat and said, hey, This meat's okay to eat. There's no chemicals on it that we know of. That it hasn't been dropped on the floor, hopefully. Nobody's fat on it, etc., etc. There were no rats running on it, that we hope. All right, next thing, and the last one of Roosevelt's square deal, he is a conservationist, meaning he conserves, meaning he saves, he sets aside land. So this has to do with land, mainly, okay? This is not yet the National Park Service, but that's coming. That's the next up on the list. So he sets around 230 million acres of land aside to later become the national parks, national monuments, and national forests. So if you ever go to a national park, you can thank Roosevelt for this because he has the early idea for it. It is a progressive idea. It's an early idea for it. And like I said, before that land belonged to somebody else, yes, it is terrible in American history that happened. I'm not disagreeing with that. It's very terrible, actually. But it is good now that that land is still there in its pristine condition. It's been left alone and we can visit it today. Okay? Moving on, rocking and rolling. I think we're about done with Roosevelt here. So here he is, Roosevelt. I told you he's kind of like the manly man. Here he is all dressed up in his hunting garb and a little quote about conservation from him. All right? All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to Wilson. I'm skipping I put all the questions at the end. Time for class again. I put all the questions at the end. So we'll go over all the questions about Roosevelt at the end. But let's go ahead and jump into Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson. He made a set of speeches that were called the New Freedom. And mainly what he's focusing on here. So Roosevelt, he was big on let's keep the public safe. Let's look out for the public. Let's do good for the public. Let's go after these corporations. And now Wilson, he is the next, there's Taft in between them. But Wilson is the next president we focus on, who focuses on making bigger economic reforms, which involves money. So he wants money to be a little more equal in America. And he's got a couple ways he does that. But first he lays out his plan in a set of speeches called the New Freedom. And you need to remember that name. It's just Roosevelt's ideas about how to take care of America in relation to that right there. Because if you think about it, money really is freedom, okay, in a certain way. All right, so some cartoons and things. Here you got Roosevelt. He is pouring in antitrust legislation. So he again goes after the trust, and it says business prosperity pump. So he's going to help out small businesses. He's going to help out normal people like you and me, and things are going to get better economically for America. Now, here's how he does it. He passes something called the Federal Reserve Act. And what this does is it sets up 12 different regional Federal Reserve banks around America. So what this does is it helps keep an eye on the private banks in their region. So it's basically just establishing a money system within America because he also creates the modern day money. And I don't know if you know this, but the dollars in your pocket are actually called Federal Reserve notes. So Wilson kind of just modernizes the whole system. He modernizes our money system, okay? So before, it was kind of just out in the open. They did have money, but it wasn't a lot that were going around. But this is really going to kickstart our economy, okay? And it's going to help out people like you and me who are not the big trusts and the big monopolies. So Wilson, good president, especially in the economic sector. So what you need to know, New Freedom, that's his ideas. One of the ideas in the New Freedom is the Federal Reserve Act, which just creates more banks, basically. So what you should know about this Federal Reserve Act, more banks and the Federal Reserve Note, which is the money that's in your pocket, okay? If you've got some. I don't have any. Bummer. Oh, well. All right. All right. Excuse me. So the Federal Reserve System, established by this guy right here, Wilson. Okay. Wilson's a good president for the American people. He's almost like too good. He's kind of a really, really nice guy. And we're going to talk more about this when we get to World War I because he is president during World War I. He's just a little too nice, but that works out good for the American people. For America as a whole on the world stage, we're going to see it gets a little weird, but that's off topic. What you need to know more about Wilson is that he takes Roosevelt's idea of conservation, setting aside land, and he finally establishes the National Park Service. So all the national parks in America, we can thank for Wilson. More come later. Excuse me, I got choked. But he sets aside land just like Roosevelt. He just follows after Roosevelt, follows in his footsteps, and keeps things going and sets up the National Park Service. Good job, Wilson. Good president. Very, very, very good. Awesome. Cool. All right. Let me get a swig of water because I got choked. talking too much. But here you go. You can see all the national parks, and I'll let you pause right there and you can zoom in. I wonder how many of you have been to several of these. I've been to these two. Let me see. Yeah, I think that's it. I'd like to go to the Grand Canyon. If you've been to any of them, email me and let me know. Tell me how they work, because I bet they're awesome. But anyway, Woodrow Wilson establishes this. This is part of the New Freedom. So he did the Federal Reserve Act, which set up banks. He did the Federal Reserve Note, which is the money in your pocket, and then the National Park Service, which is awesome. All right, last one. We're rocking and rolling, getting right through this. And this one is really, really simple, okay? This is the women's suffrage movement, which women's suffrage, remember, the word suffrage sounds weird. It's actually a good thing. Suffrage sounds bad, but it's actually good. It means the right to vote. Now, I know it sounds crazy that women didn't have the right to vote before the early 1900s. Unfortunately, that's American history. Things were not always so great. But women didn't always have the right to vote, but we're going to get to that right here, the 19th Amendment. And Tennessee actually does something really, really good. Good job, Tennessee. Tennessee has a pretty decent history. And Tennessee right here has a shining moment. They are the perfect 36th, meaning the 36th state to ratify women's suffrage, putting them at the number they needed, and they got the job done. The 19th Amendment gets passed, women's right to vote. Yeah! Now let's get specific and go through some of these and talk about who the women were that made this happen. All right. Carrie Chapman Cat is the first one that you need to know. She was a big supporter of the 19th Amendment and the women's suffrage movement. And so she worked pretty much her whole life. She was a superintendent of schools in Iowa, and then she worked in California. She is one of the greatest women in American history. Let's look at what she looks like. So she is what we call a suffragette. Suffragette, which is a woman who fights for women's suffrage. Suffragette. She is very important in American history. This is her. Hello, Carrie Chapman Cat. And here she is. She's right in the middle of this stamp here, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, who you probably learned about in 8th grade. They lived a long time ago, but Carrie Chapman Cat, she lives in the era that we learn about here. Okay, so cool. So that's Carrie Chapman Cat. She is a suffragette, a women's suffrage movement leader. All right, now we get to Ann Dallas Dudley, okay? Ann Dallas Dudley, she is actually a Tennessean. Let's take a look at her. She lived in a fancy part of Nashville, and she fought for the women's right to vote. She is the founder of the Nashville Equal Suffrage League, so she is just another suffragette. And she is home to Tennessee is her home, and Tennessee, like I told you before, was the 36th and final state to support women's suffrage. Good job, Ann Dallas Dudley. Way to fight for rights. Good job. Good job. And there she is. I like your hat. Cool. Last one, Alice Paul. Alice Paul was a Quaker woman. Quaker women, in Quaker society, if you recall, Quakers were similar to the Pilgrims, but they settled in Pennsylvania, and they actually believed in equal rights for men and women, okay? And Alice Paul, she was raised in this Quaker society where she had equal rights, so she took a look at American society, and she's like, yeah, we need equal rights. We need the right to vote. So she's another suffragette. She went to jail, actually, for all of her protesting. She worked in England, and in England, things got a little violent. Sometimes they would break windows and light stuff on fire and stuff because they really, really wanted the right to vote. Good job, Alice Paul. Way to fight for your rights, okay? So Alice Paul, just another suffragette who fought for women's right to vote, all right? Cool. So the way they did this, they did a lot of publicity things. So they put ads in newspapers, they would go on parades, they would make banners, posters, they would sing songs, all these different things to get their agenda taken care of. So let's look at a picture. Obviously, it didn't always go peaceful, and sometimes women did get arrested. But hey, sometimes that draws a little more attention to it, okay? Now, before Wilson got this thing passed, and I think it actually comes a little bit after him. I'm not sure exactly when Wilson ended being president. I probably should know that. Don't hate on me too much. I got to know a lot for this class, okay? But see, you got these posters that say Wilson is against women. So they're really getting out there, and they're really saying something, which is fantastic. Good job, ladies. Way to fight for the right to vote. Sorry you didn't have it before, but I'm glad you got it. Good job, ladies. All right, let's rock and roll. Finally, on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed. So just over 100 years ago. So very good. Now, this is the best thing from the entire progressive era because this literally is half the population now getting new rights, now getting the right to vote, now their voices heard. And remember, in America, this is what we want right here. Democracy. We want democratic advancement. We want everyone to be equal. We want everyone to be heard. We want everyone to have a voice. And so the progressive era, overall, a very successful time at getting these things done. Not perfectly successful because still a lot of racism. We're going to get to that one later. But as far as helping out women and helping out the consumers and helping out general American people, outside of racism, and I know, but that's a whole other issue, and we will talk about it later. But this overall is very good for women, okay? So, there we have it. They're yay, very successful, yay, very glad. Now, let's talk about how it actually got passed. They needed to have 36 states to get this done, because you had to have a majority of states. So 36 states, and when it came down to the vote on August 18th, when the legislature decided, hey, we got to sit down and do this, are we going to do it or not? Tennessee passed the 36th vote and becomes known as the Perfect 36. Good job, Tennessee. Way to have a bright moment in history. Very, very good. Good job, Tennessee. So roll of Tennessee as the Perfect 36. They passed the 36th vote to get the 19th Amendment passed. 19th is women's suffrage. Women's suffrage, which means the right to vote. All right. I know I repeat myself a lot, but I want you to make sure that you remember this stuff. Remember, repetition is the key to memory. All right. All right. Oh, there we go. Hold up. Let me go back. This is in downtown Nashville. I believe it's right outside the library. But here are women marching in protest for the right to vote. All right. We are done with the standards. We're going to answer the questions now. So pause as needed, and we're going to go through these. And I actually got to hurry up because I got a class coming in here in just a little bit. It's Thursday. I usually post on Sundays, so hope everybody's having a great Thursday. Number one, what was the purpose of Roosevelt's collective set of progressive policies known as the Square Deal? There are three C's. Consumer protection. So that's going to be the Food and Drug Act and the Pure Meat Inspection Act, or the Meat Inspection Act, Pure Food and Drug Act and Meat Inspection. Consumer protection. Remember, he's antitrust or anti-bad trust, so control of corporations. Control of corporations. And last one is conservation. Excuse me. I promise I'm not sick. I've just been talking a lot. It's so weird nowadays. You can't even hardly cough without somebody looking at you sideways. Let me look at it and make sure it looks good. I think it's good. Remember to pause as needed. Let me scoot it up just a touch. That's a little bit better. There we go. Roosevelt, as trustbuster, did not wish to destroy corporations, but instead wanted to make corporations serve the public good. That means help out you and me. Help out the workers. Do right by the people. So serve the public good. The good of the public. Not like, oh, he wanted to make them serve the public good. No, that would be well. Serve the public good. The good of the public. The good of the public. Okay? Serve the public good. Should we rephrase that? Probably. Let's say better serve the people. Better serve the people. I don't want anybody thinking I got bad grammar. Better serve the people. Sorry, I overthink these things sometimes. There we go. What were the provisions of the Pure Food and Drug Act? Had to have use pure ingredients. Use pure ingredients. My goodness, I got a tickle in my throat. Use pure ingredients. And label on the outside. You had to list all the ingredients. How did the jungle lead to reforms in the meatpacking industry? And I think we already had this question, but the jungle exposed the terrible conditions of the meat factories. Exposed the bad conditions in the meat factories. Ah, something's got me. Got a tickle. All right. Let me get some water. You take a look. Because I had to talk so fast. Man, oh man. Lots of knowledge. It's good water. Thank you, Pure Food and Drug Act, for good, pure water. All right, rock and roll. Hopefully you're good. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's go. How did Roosevelt use his presidential power to support conservation? He set aside millions of acres of public land. Set aside millions of acres of public land. Meaning you couldn't touch it. You could go visit it, but you couldn't damage it or anything like that. Millions of acres of public land. So the people can use it. They can go visit. They can't tear it up. You could go camping on it, that sort of thing. But you had to take care of it. What did Wilson promise in his New Freedom speeches? Remember, his New Freedom has to do with this, money, okay? So greater economic opportunity for all. Greater economic opportunity for all. He said money is the key to freedom, and in a way he's pretty much right, because if you have money, you're able to do more things. You're not having to work all the time. So he wants to extend that to everybody. Greater economic opportunity for all. And remember, you got to be fancy in this class. You got to say economic opportunity, okay? I know, we got to play the game. What was the purpose of the Federal Reserve Act? It did two things. It established banks in America and created what we call the Federal Reserve Note, which is just modern day money. Modern money. Currency. There we go. What is the purpose of the National Park Service? It goes back to this. It set aside public lands for people to visit. How do we want to say that? Kept beautiful areas in America protected and pristine. Pristine means like it's perfect. Nobody's going to mess with it. Kept beautiful areas in America protected and pristine. That means it has not been messed up by human hands. Now I know what you're thinking. I've gone to a national park and it had roads and things like that in it. That just makes it more accessible so that you can appreciate the beauty and the pristineness of it, okay? I need to go to more national parks. Bummer. All right, pause if you need to. Let me make sure you can read my handwriting. I think it's good enough. I know it's not great, but I think it's good enough. All right, hopefully you're good. Pause if you need to. Email me if you need to. And the last set of the questions. What do Carrie Chapman Cat and Dallas Dudley and Alice Paul all have in common? They all fought for women's suffrage. All fought for women's suffrage. Sweet. What activities did suffragists partake in to promote their suffragist agenda? In other words, how did they fight for women's suffrage? So that's going to be protests, posters, songs, advertisements in the newspaper. And then I'm just going to put ETC for etc. There you go. A few more minutes. Ready? Purpose of the 19th Amendment. Let's say gave women the right to vote. I was going to say allowed women to vote, but we're going to say gave women the right to vote. Gave women the right to vote. There we go. Very good. And then number 12. Why is Tennessee known as the perfect 36? Tennessee was the 36th and final state needed to pass the amendment. So Tennessee, I'm going to put T in for Tennessee, provided the final necessary vote to pass the amendment. To pass the amendment. And gave women the right to vote. All right, so let's wrap it up. Progressive era is done. Yeah, sweet. We're making great progress, actually. So Roosevelt, he's a great president for the American people at home. He does a lot of good things. The 3 C's of the square deal. Remember, square deal is a fair deal. It's good for the people, all equal sides of the square. 3 C's are controlled corporations, meaning they got to help out the people. Conservation, setting aside land for people to enjoy. And consumer protection, so you don't have to eat gross, nasty meat anymore. Then Wilson comes along and he's got something called the New Freedom. And the way he does the New Freedom is to give greater economic opportunity, meaning money. He basically just increases the amount of money, he increases the amount of banks, and he modernizes our money system, the Federal Reserve note. So Wilson's New Freedom just means greater economic opportunity for all. He's looking out for people and their wallets. Thank you, Wilson. And lastly, we get to women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment. Make sure you remember that it's the 19th Amendment because you will see it many times on our tests. Sorry. But the women's right to vote. Some of the suffragettes are these ladies, Carrie Chapman Cat and Dallas Dudley and Alice Paul. They did stuff like go on protests, sing songs, all that stuff. And then Tennessee, good job, Tennessee, perfect 36. So that wraps up the progressive era. Remember, the progressive era is all about progress, and it's increasing the rights and good things for American people. All right, guys, please email me with any questions. I believe this is our last one before fall break. Awesome. We're rocking and rolling, making great progress. Hope everybody has a great day. Email me with any questions. Visit my webpage to view this PowerPoint if you need it and download the notes. And again, reach out if you have any questions. Keep doing what you're doing. Y'all are doing an awesome job. And have a great day. See ya.